Hello, I'm Annie Larkin, Vice President and Director of Community Engagement of the Amerind Museum. Welcome to Casas Grandes Clothing and Identity with Dr. Christine VanPool. Before we begin the program today, I want to acknowledge that Amerind is located in southeastern Arizona, on lands where O'odham, Hopi, Oshwe, Yoeme, and Apache families have lived for untold generations, and whose wisdom and traditions live on today in vibrant communities. We are grateful for what all of these communities, rich in history, have to teach us. Thank you to our program sponsors, Desert Diamond Casinos, as well as our members and donors who enable Amerind to provide free online programming and fulfill Amerind's mission to foster and promote the knowledge and understanding of the Native peoples of the Americas through research, education, conservation, and community engagement. To learn how you can assist Amerind in supporting its mission and programs by becoming a member or donor, please visit amerind.org. On July 23rd at 11 a.m., Amerind will host the free online lecture, Prehistoric Moche Politics and Food Along Peru's North Coast with Dr. George Wolf Gummerman. Please visit the events section of Amerind's Facebook page or website, amerind.org, for registration details. Then on Saturday, August 6th at 11 a.m., Amerind will host the free online lecture, Contextualizing Old Museum Collections, the case of the obsidian mirrors at the Smithsonian's National Museum of the American Indian, with Drs. Maria Martinez and Michael Brandel. Again, please visit the events section of Amerind's Facebook page or website, amerind.org, for registration details. And now I'd like to introduce our speaker. Christine S. VanPool grew up in Ruidoso, New Mexico. She earned her BS in anthropology at Eastern New Mexico University and her MA and PhD from the University of New Mexico. In 2006, she joined the anthropology faculty at the University of Missouri-Columbia. Over the last 20 years, her main research focus has been on archaeological method and theory as it pertains to religion and pottery symbolism in the Casas Grandes world. In 2007, she had been co-directing a museum and field projects with Todd L. VanPool in northern Mexico and southern Arizona and New Mexico. She is the author or editor of 5 books and numerous articles. If you'd like to ask any questions during the program today, please type your questions in the Q&A chat box, and we'll gather those questions to share with our speaker after the presentation. And also a link to today's recording will be sent to all of our Zoom registrants later today. And with that, I would like to welcome Dr. Christine VanPool. Welcome, Christine.
Thank you, Annie. I appreciate the invite and look forward to talking with everyone. I'm going to pull up my slideshow. Hopefully everyone can see my slideshow at this point. Because of this format, I'm used to being more interactive with the audience. I like to talk with people rather than at people. And so one of the things I'm going to do is probably ask some questions, give a couple seconds delay as if you're thinking about answering it. And then I'm going to assume you gave me a pretty close to the correct answer, and then we will move forward. So that will be the format. Today, I'm going to be talking about Casas Grandes Medio Period Clothing and Identity. And one of the things we'll be looking at is the famous Ramos polychromes of the Casas Grandes world, which has very distinctive male and female effigies, which we can clearly tell when we're looking at biological females and biological males. Some of you might recognize this one. It's actually at the Amerind, and it was on display in 2018 when I went there to give the same presentation I'm giving today. What we can learn from the effigies is actually astonishing. It actually went beyond all ideas I had when I started my dissertation research in the late 1990s. But this ceramic tradition has so much information on it. And every time I think I'm done with Casas Grandes pottery, I find something new that I hadn't thought about before. And so I'm even now, 20, 30 years later, still finding new stuff in the iconography. But we'll be talking about how the effigies depict different social ideas, concepts, social norms in their world, in the Casas Grandes world, with males sitting in a particular posture like we see in this one, women with their legs out, women taking care of children, and pottery associated with birds, males smoking and sitting in this position. And we'll be talking about that as well. We'll be talking also about the different symbols on the pottery, like the pound sign here, birds, serpents, all kinds of things. Many of you probably already know where the Casas Grandes region is. It's mostly in northern Chihuahua, but it spans into the southern US boundaries today, into southern New Mexico, a little bit into Arizona. My oval's a little off here, into the Mexican states of Sonora, and again into Chihuahua. My husband and I, Todd VanPool and Gordon Rakita at University of Northern Florida, have been doing field work here at 76 Draw. And when this blew up, my triangle shifted. It's just barely north of the US Mexican border, near Deming, New Mexico, south of Deming, for those that have been out there. We'll be talking primarily about Paquime, the large site that was excavated by the Amerind through Charles de Peso, and also INA as well, the Joint Casas Grandes project, in a second. We now call it Paquime more formally. It was formerly called Casas Grandes, and we're going to be talking about the Medio Period, AD 1200 to 1450. Many of you already know that Charles de Peso excavated the site, and it was really an interesting site. It has adobe-like architecture that's reminiscent of the Puebloan world to the north, but also has ritual ball courts that are more what we see in Mesoamerica, the eye-shaped ball court. It also has effigy mounds. Charles de Peso got out here during the summer solstice in the northern hemisphere, the summer solstice, and thought this was a solstice marker. Charles de Peso in so many ways was ahead of his time period, looking at these type of relationships to the mountains and the sun, all kinds of neat stuff. Here is Charles de Peso. All of us Casas Grandes archaeologists owe a great debt of gratitude to the founder of the Amerind. So I thought I'd throw in a picture here to Mr. Fulton. Wow, just wow. I'm so happy that as an archaeologist, we're able to do that. Charles de Peso, through the Amerind, as many of you know, created an 8-volume set publication. Edge of volume sits on my shelf about this big. It is truly astonishing. And myself, my students, my colleagues, other students are mining those volumes all the time. And again, we're finding all kinds of little things to do thanks to this great work by the Amerind and INA. As you probably know, de Peso, along with Eduardo Contreras, they excavated Paquime between 1958 and 1961. That must have been a daunting task. This is not American archaeology. This is practiced by contract archaeology. This was a de Peso phenomenon, I believe. But you can just see them putting in these test units along the way. I just find that absolutely remarkable. And then the old truck's a nice touch too. My colleagues, Paul Minnis and Michael Whalen, have talked about Paquime having been overbuilt. Paquime has these huge 1 meter wide walls. This place was designed to impress. It was overbuilt, kind of like the White House is in Washington, D.C. It's overbuilt to impress dignitaries and other people, be a central place for politics, religion, and this type of stuff. And so I totally agree with my colleagues. This is overbuilt architecture. But that's not the discussion of my stuff today. So in the late 1996, my husband and I went with Bob Leonard with the University of New Mexico to a site called Villa Hamada in Galeana. And I was going to do a technological study on pottery, but everyone kept telling me, Chris, you need to study the iconography. I was like, yeah, the iconography is beautiful, but I kept finding these type of vessels. There are thousands of these in museums. Not all of them have these type of symbols, but this is probably, if I had to pick one vessel that shows Casas Grandes pottery the best, I'd actually pick this one at the Amerind. I hope people can see my cursor here. So what's really interesting about the Medio Period ceramic iconography is it has grammars like language with syntax. And this grammar syntax evolves around duality. So we see these interlocking red and black steps, interlocking triangles, interlocking steps. If you notice, we have a red step here and a black step. So red's on top, black's on bottom. If you go over to its kind of mirror, but not mirror side on this side, you have black and red. It's rotating. If we were to take this vessel and spin it, the next panel would be red and black steps. So they alternate around the vessel. And by the time you get back around, you're back to red on black all the way around. I found this continually in the museums I was visiting. I visited for just my dissertation, over 5 museums. And then since then, I've been many other places, always photographing Casas Grandes material when I see it. But this is my archetype of what I think about Casas Grandes. Thousands of these are in museum, tens of thousands. But there's also the very rich effigy traditions. So we have birds and snakes, but also human effigies, as we see here. And this is the topic of today, are the human effigy vessels. This one's at the Amerind. It's an oversized Casas Grandes male effigy. Absolutely amazing. You can see that we have already differences between how males are portrayed and females are portrayed. The artisans did not leave this to our imagination, which are male or which are female. So in American anthropology, when we talk about gender, gender is a social construct that's overlaid on biological sex. And so what I'm looking at is how the Casas Grandes artisans chose to depict what we might call male social construct and female social construct. And it's pretty clear on these. Males are shown in a particular posture they sit in. So usually in more of a sitting or kneeling position, where females sit with their legs out. Early ethnographers in the American Southwest, especially among the Pueblo people, noted that females sat with their legs out. That was the proper sitting position for a female in the historic time period. We kind of see that sensibility here within the Casas Grandes world. We also find gendered activities. What is socially subscribed to biological females is, again, with the legs sitting out, but the females hold bowls and hold children. That's a common theme in the Casas Grandes Medio Period world. And again, another one, a female holding a child and holding bowls. This is probably what they did in real life. This is what females do. Within anthropological theory and gender studies, we find that in traditional societies, women that are nursing and taking care of children need interruptible work. And so this would be a great way that they could do what they need to do around the household, do their things. Now, my husband and I, in several publications, suggest that the women are important in rituals for feasting. They tend to hold these large bowls, and at Pakime, they get really large. And at Joyce Wells up to the north, we have this huge Caretas bowl. It looks like iconographically, these bowls are actually Ruidoso and Caretas bowls. So it's like they're taking Ramos or Babikra and then putting a different type as the bowl. And these tend to be big bowls. And we think that's part of the feasting rituals that females would have been doing during certain rituals, which we'll talk about in a minute. Males tend to be shown either in sitting or kneeling or smoking. We do not have a single effigy vessel in which a male is holding a bowl or a child. And so they're keeping those gendered activities different between the males and the females. Lots of examples of smokers. This one's also at the Amerind. It was on display in 2018. Beautiful vessel there too. We also find gendered symbols, different icons and motifs on the pottery. Females are found, so these are statistical arguments, meaning that there's a robust pattern with females having birds where males have horn-plumed serpents. You might say, well, where's the horn-plumed serpent on this vessel? Glad you asked. So here is on the legging, these are leggings. Here is the snake's body. It curls up and over. The horn is here, the mouth, the eye, and then off its, I don't know, shoulder, edge of the back, dorsal fins, dorsal feathers more like it, is the horn plume serpent. Tend to be statistically more on the males, although occasionally you'll find a male with a bird and occasionally females with a serpent. These do happen. In fact, this one has a horn plume serpent over here, but statistically speaking, there is a difference between male and females. Again, look at the female with the birds and the male with the plume horn serpents. There are two of these. This one's in Santa Fe in a private collection, and there's one from May. I'm going to show in a minute that's on display at the museum. You notice she looks a little reclined, as does the other one. I think that a lot of the female effigies are pregnant. They tend to have very flaring hips, rotund and bit of tummies, bellies, and I think it denotes pregnancy. I think this may be she is ready for that child to come out. I know when I had my two boys at that end of the pregnancy, I'm like, oh, just please, let's get rid of the children out of, anyway. So I think these are females in some type of pregnancy or birthing. Here we have a horn plume serpent. Steve Lexon sent this to me as I was doing my dissertation research. This is from Dutch ruin. I believe this is a horned plume serpent. Often the bird effigies for owls and killdeer, and especially quail, have this speckling on it that denotes feather. So I think the speckling on this is that the feather, the soft feathers that we see on birds in the iconography. So I think this is literally a plumed serpent here on this Dutch ruin smoker effigy. One of the things that the Casas Grandes artist did, that if you take a course in art history or one of these, we don't think about a tiny little symbol being used to differentiate things, but in the Casas Grandes world, they do. I noticed this pound sign right here on a lot of the male effigies, and people painted with headdresses on and anthropomorph. So I thought this related to a male ritual back when I was doing my dissertation, but males have, we now call that a hashtag. I don't know, I'm old school. I think of tic-tac-toe board. So you draw your tic-tac-toe and then you can play the game, but that's what they have, this pound sign on the males. That tends to be statistically more often on males, although once in a blue moon, it's on a female. So again, the exception that proves the rule, maybe. Whereas females also have kind of a pound sign. And you're like, oh, okay, it's down here on her leg. This is actually at the Laboratory of Anthropology in Santa Fe, this vessel. But you fill in the end field. So if you close this off, you can color and paint, close this one off, fill it in with paint, that one off, and then you get this really nice modified pound sign. So male and females are interrelated, gender complementary because they work together, and we kind of see this with the pound sign. So you have the male and a related symbol, the modified pound sign, that does this. This is Ken Corkada's discussion. He found this and he labeled it the modified pound sign. So I'm just borrowing from Ken. So that's some of the stuff that I found in my dissertation. Post-dissertation, I had a master's student, Lauren Downs, and we actually worked together on the clothing. Back when I did my dissertation, I was a bit naive. I'm probably still naive, but I thought because we had gender being shown on this are the primary sexual characteristics, that they weren't dressed. Actually, I don't think that anymore. I think they're actually dressed. The artisans, for whatever reason, have decided to portray the genitalia on these vessels. But I think now we have clothing. And so men have these bandolero style sashes. When we went to publish this, Dr. Weber suggested this is a bandolero style sash, and I completely agree with her. That's the way of thinking about it. So it would have been tied off on one shoulder and then gone around diagonally across the body. Women tend to have little belts that go across their hips, so they're horizontal. Men go across the chest. Women have these horizontal belts around the hips. Even this one's from the Museo at May and on display, and you can see her little belt goes across her hip here. Again, she has a bird. across. Now, sometimes we'll have something in between the sternum. It could be makeup. It could be a tattoo. Charles de Peso found evidence at Paquimé that they had makeup. So this could be makeup or it could be tattoo. Potentially, it could be either one of these. Throughout the American Southwest and northern Chihuahua and into Mexico, people wore sandals. This is a little bit of a tough terrain. You don't like stepping on cacti, at least I don't like stepping on cacti. So they had really nice yucca woven sandals. We find them in the polychromes. I think this is probably a male foot because of that. Why would I think that? Yes, there's a pound sign sitting on this. But what's interesting about these is the Casas Grandes sandals do not look like that exactly. We have evidence that the toes are well within the end of the sandal. The Casas Grandes foot effigy reveals that the toes are free. So the toes are exposed. When I photographed the Casas Grandes vessels, I did them from the top all around, and I always photographed the bottom when I did it. And I noticed that some of the times they would have a red pad on their foot, but like their toes were exposed. Mary Elizabeth King Black, who worked with de Peso, did the clothing study in the de Peso volumes, let me look through her original documents and her original photographs, and she gave her copies to Bob Leonard at University of New Mexico. So I was able to look at that as part of my dissertation. Here's one of her photos that were sent in as part of the Amerind research, and you can see again the toes dangling off. The men tend to have this red strap sandal. You can tell it's red here. Women tend to be barefoot, but there are a few exceptions. One of the things that's interesting is you notice that the women really flare out. Todd and I measured this statistically, and women do statistically have this nice pear shape. Most women have pear shape with our flaring hips. Men tend to be more straight bodied. When I find sandals on women, they tend to be really straight bodied, maybe more androgynous, maybe a second or third gender, perhaps. So I'm not going to talk about those today, but I think they exist in the Casas Grandes world. I believe this is Eric in the background when he let me photograph these in 2018. It was a fun trip. I really enjoyed that trip. Thank you to everyone that was part of that last time. You can see that red strap sandal under it. Here's one of the ones on display as well, red strap sandal. I think this is about a stance. This is about not your everyday footwear, your everyday sandals. This is when the analogy is a poor analogy, but in the old days, our grandparents would have had their Sunday best, the clothing you wore to your services. I think this is kind of like that. You have the red strap sandals that you pull out during ritual, that the males pulled out during rituals and ceremonies, and they used that at certain times. And of course, when they did everyday stuff, they probably would have worn a better sandal. We actually have some called bumper sandals in the Casas Grandes world, and that kind of curves up to protect those toes. We have that throughout the American Southwest. Even Dr. King noted that and thought how strange she never saw any evidence of those existing in the real world. They may or may not have, but iconographically, again, the toes are a little exposed. This is a nice one with that bird on this particular one. And again, the pound sign and the stances that the males are in. So this is how I drew this for a publication in American Antiquity. I think this is probably what it looked like. And again, I think as part of a ritual stance or a ceremonial garb, ceremonial regalia. So we see also differences in headwear versus male and females. Males tend to have much more elaborate headbands on, multiple levels, more details, multiple rings. Females often don't have headwear on or a band, but when they do, they tend to be a more narrow, thinner, less ornate. One thing that's really interesting to me is that Casas Grandes potters took a lot more time and labor to make these really nice male effigy vessels. The female effigies, while they're nice, they do not have as many design and they tend not to be as well made. So it's probably telling us something about the importance of these vessels. Oops, sorry, I'm trying to hover over this. Again, males, more elaborate headdresses, elaborate sandals, elaborate clothing with their sashes. We find sashes throughout the American Southwest, and it goes deep into prehistory. During the Basket Maker 3 period, we have this 3 millimeter long dog hair sash from northern Arizona. Historically, moving up to the modern time, Zuni males would wear headgear, perhaps to catch their sweat. We've been watching Dark Wind at Night, the new TV series that's out, and one of the characters is not named Guy. He has his headgear on, and it's supposed to take place in the early 1970s. And I'm like, yeah, growing up in New Mexico in the 1970s, near Mescalero, people wore, especially males, wore a lot of headgear, but that tends to go back deep into prehistory. And so we're seeing Casas Grandes as part of that. Here's another look at the headgear wrapped. The Martinez's. Note that she doesn't have the headgear on, but he does. Mr. Martinez does. What's also fabulous about this is the Casas Grandes, why the men have these elaborate headdresses on, and I can't see if they have hair down below. When females are painted, they always have the shorter hair. So in this social world, the gender construct was females have short hair, males have long hair. I think iconographically, I can make a case that females have short hair based on the way the hair is painted on the pottery. This headband has a long history in them. Some people have suggested these are females. I'm not entirely sure they're females. One can make the argument they are males. They're missing string aprons. That's something that women wore, and we'll talk about in a second. But they have these elaborate headgears on. I think it's like what we see, the elaborate headgear on. This is Cushing out at Zuni. And it's just showing that part of this broader tradition. Casas Grandes sits in this broader tradition. Another thing is thinking about them between what we now call the Mesoamerican world and the Puebloan world was that, oops, sorry about that, males wore blankets that were tied off the shoulder, and you could tell status by based on their blanket, or is turned into a cape and wore off the back. This one's low stat. There's not a lot of decoration on him, but we also see in the Maya world, women wove feathers and very elaborate feather work. That's what women did. They wove feather capes for the Maya leaders. But these blankets were the most significant part of male clothing throughout Mesoamerica in the Southwest, and it conveyed precise information regarding males and their status and accomplishments. So that's what they were wearing, and we see that historically. So part of this, so Casas Grandes sits right in the middle of this great tradition. Women wore string aprons. What's curious about women is that the front is the person, the back tends to be the globular jar. And I think that this could be read as the jar, where the front could be read as the woman. So I'm not sure if these are string aprons, but if I had to guess, I would say they're string aprons. We find them in members iconography, and we find them in Pottery mound to the north, about the same time, a little later as well, with women with string aprons. So in summary, Casas Grandes effigies reflect a worldview that shows their uniqueness, especially in the form of the sandals, but also things that we see in the Puebloan world with women sitting with their legs out, and across the world at this time, probably women taking care of children and also taking care of bowls, men doing rituals in the form of smoking and kneeling, wearing really nice regalia with their blanket sashes on, showing their status and their abilities in doing rituals. So that's what I have today. Questions?
Thank you so much, Christine. And yes, we do have questions.
Oh, good.
What were the effigies used for? Was it water, food, a mix of both?
That is a great question. We're not entirely sure what they were used for. There are some residues on some of them holding things. One of the things that it's hard to talk to myself to just my computer. I don't see anyone, and so I'm a little off by just talking to myself. But I'm going to go back for a second. Bear with me. I won't go too fast to get you vertigo. I hope I won't. Sorry, I probably should have closed the show and went back. But here, another preview. These vessels, at least the regular oyas, were used for everything from cooking, water, storage, and everything. I liken it to a good Swiss Army knife, one size fits all. This is what the Casas Grandes people did with pottery. This is good enough to cook in, good enough to water storage. There are better ways to do either one, but this is a good medium, a good Swiss Army knife of pottery. So they'd also interm with their dead. They had really big ones that were actually urns, 3 of them at Pakime to house the dead. So the actual oils were used for everything. One of my peers at the University of New Mexico, Maria Sprin, was doing her dissertation on work at the same time I was, and she studied the collection at the Museo at Pakime and found circular wear marks around these vessels. I think they were actually spinning them to tell stories and narratives. So I think that these things are some type of storytelling as well, based on the use wear on the bottom, but also the effigy. So some of the smokers we know from Dutch ruin and elsewhere were put into graves, so they were grave goods. I think the male effigies are being traded. We see that at Dutch ruin again. So great question. Maybe like the Oyas, they're doing a little bit of everything with the human effigies, but we need to have somebody find these, not wash them, do residue studies to really answer that question. So that's a great question. I wish I had a better answer for you.
In the garters and sandals slide, might the design on the foot-shaped vessel be a moccasin rather than a sandal? And it looks like fringe around the ankle.
You know, that, yeah, so sorry about that. This fits really nicely. So this is this coming over. So this is this, and then this is this strap coming over. So I have historically read them this way. They always wear leggings. These are garters here on her and leggings. Both male and females wear garters and leggings. So I've just read it based on this here, the legging on this. So I thought this was probably a legging, but it could be a moccasin, but I think this is showing the exposed ankle. And again, it fits the red strap coming over the way it's attached on the foot. So this coming over to here, to me, looks like this over, but that's how I read it.
And how does this organization of paint color relate to the observed ritual painting practice of the White Shaman mural in Texas, if you happen to be familiar with that?
Oh, yes, that's Carolyn Boyd's work. That's a book. To answer that question in the book. The short answer, and I'm not giving a shaman lecture this time, but I'm gonna go back a couple slides. Hold on. I promise I'm gonna answer this. So these these pound signs are found on the male effigies, but they're also found on a suite of anthropomorphic images of human bodies with macaw heads. I think they're in sulfite. I think they are shamans. I think they're like Carolyn Boyd's work with the white shaman. I think these are shamans, and I think that pound sign is marking a shamanic journey that they take as they smoke probably hallucinogenic tobacco called Nicotiana rustica, and they're traveling into the spirit world during their ceremonies, and then they come back and do stuff. I think it's for rainmaking. I think that the Pueblos call the pipe cloud blowers, and they're trying to bring in the rain. The horn plume serpent's all about rainmaking, but also water control. So at the site of Pakime, we have the horn plume. We have the mound of the serpent, which was probably a plume. We don't know which way it went because an arroyo cut through it. But yeah, it has a horn plume serpent in the eye, a really beautiful one that was stolen overnight. And then De Peso had to hire guards. But I hope that answers your question in a very simple way, but is related to a Pan-American focus on shamanic ritual with altered states of consciousness.
And one of our viewers is wondering if the dark on the male's chins are tattoos or beards, paint.
That's a great question. My colleague, Maria Sprin, suggests they're tattoos. I think she's probably right. Of course, the few mummies we have from the Casas Grandes world up into the rock shelters and caves do not have any evidence of tattooing. But yeah, that triangle like this particularly is only on males. I think tattoos, I think some of this could be makeup. Yeah, so absolutely. And Maria Sprin thought the ticks on females' chins were tattooing. We know from groups north, the Mojave and others, that during the women's puberty rites, they'll have tattoos put on their chins and on their faces as they age to also tell that difference. Potentially, they're doing the same thing in the Casas Grandes world. That's another pan-Mesoamerica. In fact, we have a lot of explorers on the eastern side of the United States, what's now present-day United States, coming in, and they're recording how common tattoos were across the Americas. It was a Pan-America thing, and so I think that probably was tattoos. But yeah, the men have the really dark triangle tattoos on their face. I have an entire lecture on tattoos that I give in one of my classes, so I could give a lecture on tattoos too, but yes, I think tattoos.
In those effigies where women are holding bowls, is there an indication that they're making the bowls?
Oh, that's $1 million question. Let me find one of my women holding a bowl. Oh, they're back up. Sorry about that. Hope you don't mind me going back. I apologize if this is distorting. Right now, we use ethnographic analogy because we see women Pueblo potters mostly made the bowls. Men would do sometimes the painting. So we tend to think about women making the bowls, the jars. So that's a argument based on analogy, but it'd be nice. I mean, as somebody who studies technology, I'd love to figure that out more concretely. Now, in the membranous world, we do have some burials where the females are put with pottery making accoutrements and tools, so we can make a pretty good case of that. I looked at all the burials from Pakime, what was within them, and boy, gender was really tough to tease out in the burials. We have a little bit of everything in the burials, but pottery itself is found both in males and females at Pakime, so we can't say, oh, only females have pottery. I wish I had a better answer, but that's something that we need to explore as Casas Grandes archaeologists.
And are there other cultures in the same region who show male and female genitalia in pottery or other artifacts?
That is a great question. I used to think this was completely unique, but we do occasionally have effigies that will show genitalia, but as a general rule of thumb, they don't always do that. So going to the north in Chaco, which is a little earlier than the Casas Grandes material we're talking about, Pepper and others found a couple of male effigies, and they're clearly male because the effigies. Dropping down closer to Casas Grandes in the Hohokam region, we have some wonderful effigies, but they do not have genitalia, and that'd be really nice. So the headgear and the turbans have been used to assume that they're males, because that's something that males wore historically. And so Hohokam archaeologists have suggested they're males based on the headgear. They may be correct, but they don't have the genitalia to demonstrate that. And so that's a great question. Further to the south, some of the traditions have, again, figurines with not so much genitalia, but West Mexico, which is due south of us, and Steve Lexon talks about that being due south of Casas Grandes. It's not Meso, it's West Mexico. We do have wonderful human figurines that are about 600, 700 years before this, and the males is clearly males and clearly females. And one of the things that's curious as a Casas Grandes archaeologist is how much some of the Casas material looks like West Mexico, but there's a big temporal division and a division in space. But yes, we have it there. And the smokers in the West Mexico earlier traditions look a lot like the Romulus smoker, but we do see genitalia in that part of the world.
We also have quite a few questions regarding the patches. First off, what do you think the patches could possibly represent?
Oh, you mean these patches? Is that what they mean by patches?
I believe so.
Okay. Yeah, that's where if I'm talking to people one-on-one, it's a little easier to tease out the questions. Maria Sprin, and I like to talk about everybody who's done the work in the Casas. Maria Sprin has suggested these are textiles and blankets. I think this was her original idea. I think she's 100% spot on. Going to the north, because I'm right in the middle, so I go north and south, but pulling on ethnography and analogy. Zuni women, when they get married, their husband weaves a blanket to give to the woman, and then she historically was wrapped in the blanket, and that's what she was put in when she was buried. These could very much be those type of blankets with the tassels that were put in as part of her accoutrement. The type of blankets tend to be on both males and females, but it could be maybe males and females are showing those blankets, those patches. One of the things I want to go back to real quick while I'm thinking about it, Lauren Down and my husband, we looked at these statistically. We found that in their facial patterning, there was so much variation on symbols that we thought these were actually individual people being sculpted. So somebody would know exactly who she is, exactly who she was by name. And so like all of us, we have personal things we wear, personal designs. It was really the face, but then we have clothing and styles that we wear. So all the women, not all, but most of the women have these belts on. So I hope that kind of teases that out a little bit, but it could be that males and females are showing with similar blankets in the Casas Grandes world. So going back to this blanket idea, let's go back to the one at the Amerind. Again, he's got it on, these patches, probably textiles. I think he's wearing a shirt. I think this is showing the long shirt that they would have worn. So he's wearing a shirt. She's probably shirtless. And again, with that, maybe a tattoo of a bird on her chest or makeup of that. But yeah, patches are probably blankets, woven blankets.
And one of our Facebook viewers is a descendant of the Raramari.
Oh,
and
good.
Was wondering if it was possible they are descended from Casas Grandes and the Paquime civilization.
I think so. And I think that some of the woven and the Rahamari in those regular sandals can run like the wind. I think some of that sensibility was also happening with the Casas Grandes males that we see. Historically, we have Lumholtz. Carl Lumholtz went through that part of Mexico, and he's recording people with these wonderful males with this wonderful headgear on. And again, I think that's part of that larger tradition. But yes, I think that's highly likely. And one of the things that Lumholtz records back in the late 1800s is this style sash woven with the same symbols, the same black on red, and these narrow belts, if that's a good word, belt. And so I think we see that continuity from Medio Period Casas Grandes to the Rahamari historically. So I think so, yes.
And have there been studies of the size of the sandals found, and were any small enough to be for children?
We have, because the textiles and the sandals, the preservation is very poor at the excavations at Paquime, and throughout the Casas Grandes world, the preservation is not so great. So we don't have many things. We have a couple of shirts that have been found in rock shelters. One of them is a very famous one that Linda Teague publishes one in her book. It's a great one. But some of the sandals, we have whole sandals, but to my knowledge, I'd have to look into that, but mostly what we're finding are more adult size sandals that we've found. Okay.
And sandal fragments.
Okay. Oh yes, we have a lot of, my husband's sitting beside me. He knows a lot too. We have a lot of sandal fragments, but the whole pieces are hard to come by. You have to have the right preservation to get them.
And do any designs on the effigy pots in Pakime, are they found on members pottery or other native pottery?
Yes, they are. The interlocking steps. And so, sorry to do this. We'll just talk about this. Now in members, we have hatching. So they have solid black, things like this, but then the hatching. And so we have these type of step designs and some interlocking designs with the hatch in the solid. We have lots of scrolls. Members iconography shows people sitting and smoking. I would suggest they're males, but we have male smoking. We have serpents all over both traditions, so we see that continuity as well.
And if you don't mind, I'll ask you just a couple more questions.
Go for it. I've got nowhere to be.
Okay. Does the Mata Ortiz phenomenon have a positive, negative, or no impact on your work and research?
That is a great question. That has a major impact. I remember years ago going out like all tourists. I like being a tourist. It's one of my favorite hobbies is just to go as a tourist, but meeting Juan Quesada and listening to him talk about pottery making and how it was done and what he thought it meant and where he thought Casas Grandes material was made. He was also very clear that he thought his ancestors also made members pottery. We have a site that we recorded outside of Janos, Chihuahua, in the Janos Municipal. You walk across the site, half of it's members, half of it's Casas Grandes. I really wanted to excavate that site, but the drug wars got going and it was a little dicey, and that's another discussion. But we definitely have a lot of members archaeology down in Chihuahua. The Mugion go down into and go up into the United States, however you want to do that division. But yes, so that does. And one of the things we know with Juan Quesada copying pottery pieces and some of the early stuff he saw they picked up off the ground doesn't have the same grammars as this. And so some of the early Mata Ortiz looks enough different and the technology is different. So I like buying that stuff and looking at how similar and different they are, looking at that. So this definitely impacted my research a lot.
Can you clearly see differences in tattoos and jewelry on the effigies?
Yes. Well, assuming in their tattoos, that's still a hypothesis. But one of the thing is, yeah, this is a good one as any. This type of wavy lines we get in, oh yes, thank you. The face tattoos, if they're tattoos or makeup, they're individual. They're something that's occurring. We see this in West Mexico, this format, and we see in Chaco Canyon, these wavy lines that we think symbolizes rain. But they were wearing jewelry, a lot of bracelets. She's wearing a bracelet. Sometimes we see these big pendants sitting as a string coming down. So absolutely, I think they're probably individualistic what jewelry they're wearing. Now going to the burial population at Pakime, De Peso and crew found pendants, necklaces, rings, all kinds of stuff. A lot of ocean shell was being used, a little bit of stone. Absolutely. And I think even maybe this red line may even be something that's symbolizing itself of some type of jewelry as well. So absolutely, yes.
And were there effigies of children?
Now, some of the females I say look a little more androgynous that are shown with sandals. It could be that they're girls, young girls dressed beautifully, very elaborate with sandals where they haven't had their first menses, their first period, and their bodies haven't started to expanding out to the hip to waist ratio. So maybe, but most of them look, I don't know, very adult women to me. Again, a lot of them are a little bit chubby, and that's a good thing because I think it has to do with fertility. If you have good rain, you have more corn. With more corn, you have more children. And so I think that that was part of their world that would have been a useful thing. So that's kind of where I'm at on that. Did I answer the question? Oh, good. I hope I answered the question. Sometimes I ask people, did I answer your question or do I need to add more?
No, you did fantastic. Let's see, would you talk a bit about how your ideas changed to interpreting geometric patterns as clothing items from previous interpretation as body paint?
Oh, that's a great question. We had a very famous anthropologist join the staff at Mizzou, Napoleon Chagnon. We have a very well-known South American anthropologist, Robert Walker. I have students that have classes from them. And I was watching something by Napoleon Chagnon as I was teaching cultural anthropology classes. Sometimes I pick up those classes if I need to. And one of the things I was thinking as I was watching it, there was somebody that observed that a male's fully dressed with a little belt on. That's fully dressed. I'm like, wow, yes, that's right. So I was being a bit ethnocentric or had my own Judeo-Christian thought background, Euro-American. And when I realized this could be fully dressed, I'm like, yeah, of course. And historically, we know that many groups, the women didn't wear a top. That wasn't necessary. But when the Europeans came and the Spanish, they were like, they wanted women to get dressed very quickly. So it's interesting that the males were tended to be with the shirts on and the females less so. But that's a cultural perception, that a cultural dictation, that's a cultural norm that's mapped onto gender. So in the Casas Grandes world, the women could wear this belt and leggings, maybe some tattoos. This one might actually be a shirt. It's kind of hard to tell. But yeah, so that's how it changed. It was definitely a different thought process, but that's how I got there.
What do the ever-present circles with the dots in the middle represent?
No, that's a great one. I have a whole paper on that one too, and it's in my dissertation. This right here, I'm assuming, and this right here. So we have a lot of snake effigies in Casas Grandes, and the snakes are wonderful, formed out and around. The bodies come up out of the Oya. Often they have circles. These circles, Western Diamondback, if you look at a Western Diamondback, and I have a picture of a slide of us at the Joyce Well Ball Court, and that Western Diamondback is curled up, sitting there, but his diamonds look like circles. So Charlie Painter, the New Mexico State herpetologist, when I was doing my dissertation, I consulted with him, and he's like, you know, those could be Diamondbacks. Like, could be. So I think these are symbolizing snakes, snake skins, and they're all over the iconography. And it could be snake leather. It could be just how they're depicting snakes and serpents. This is a feathered sash, much like the Navajo I showed in front of a Hogan earlier. These are feathers across that bandolero sash. But anyway, going back to there, we have birds and serpents and snakes all over this, but I think those are snake bodies.
And as our last question, I've taken up so much of your time with questions. Thank you. Our last question, are some of the symbols that you've identified as the plumed serpent, could they possibly be macaws?
You know, that's a great one. Gloria Fenner thought if we cut this one off this woman, so this one's a little more complex, but she thought that maybe macaw beak coming over. Yeah, as an icon, it could be macaw. I think that is multiple read multiple ways. So one of the things we have in the iconography is we'll have like the serpent that comes up and is horned with the mouth in this, but we also have entire snake bodies with a macaw head on it. So it's definitely a macaw-headed snake. And one of the women on my dissertation committee was Flora Clancy. She speaks Nahuatl. She's an Aztec archaeologist. When she saw that macaw-headed serpent on my pottery, she's like, there's Quetzalcoatl. I'm like, yes. And so that ambiguity with snake and macaw is running through the iconography. So yeah, it could be read probably as macaw or snake, because that's what the snake bird is all about. Quetzal bird, Huatl snake, snake bird. So these are snake birds. So yeah, I think even in what we might call a motif or a glyph could be read either way, macaw or serpent, in the Casas Grandes iconography, based on what I'm seeing in and of itself in the iconography with serpents with macaw head on it.
Thank you so much, Christine, for
You're
a fabulous presentation. And thank you,
you,
Todd.
He put his thumbs up over beside me.
And it was a true joy to learn about some of these pieces that are housed at Amerind. So it's just been a delight today. Again, thank you.
Oh, thank you. And thank you for the invitation. I'm VanPool C at missouri.edu. If you have more questions I didn't answer, feel free to email me.
Oh, that's very kind of you. Also, thank you to our audience for joining us today. We hope that you'll be back on July 23rd for our next online program. Have a good day, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.